Good morning from Stockholm here in Sweden, Northern Europe, planet Earth. In this video, I want to give you some reflections and thoughts about my understanding of the term global history, why I think it's important, and how it relates to my own experience when it comes to history. So, here is the thing. I have been interested in history since my early childhood. There are several reasons for that. One of them is that I was born in a teacher family, and one of my grandfathers was also a teacher of geography and history. So I grew up with books about history, so educational books, school books. And I also grew up with my mother, who was working as a librarian. So she was very much into books. She was a student of literature. And also my father was very much interested in reading books. So my experiences with the history as a subject, but also more as a process, is the following. So I was born in Yugoslavia in 1989. So it was still the country was called the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and I was born in the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I was living in Bosnia during and after the war. So already in my childhood, I had very emotional experience with history, because I was basically witnessing, I was experiencing things that were very confusing for me, that were feeling very negative, sometimes even very horrible, very extreme. And my experience is the following. So at home, you have books published, written in a country that doesn't exist anymore. And these books, they give you a certain type of information. Unfortunately, and this is something I realized later in life, that most of these books about history published from Yugoslavia were more or less politicized. So meaning that um, official historians who were writing these books, or government employees in the Ministry of Education or similar, were basically writing history in accordance how the Yugoslav system wanted it to be. And as you maybe know, Yugoslavia was a dictatorship. It was not a democracy, and it was a society where there was censorship, and there was ideological politicization of history writing. So meaning, for example, that things, um, how to say, events in history that were not favored, were not liked by the Yugoslav, communist system, were simply not mentioned in the books, or they were downplayed, or they were ignored, for different reasons. Now, what happened basically with the collapse of Yugoslavia, especially in, for example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Serbia, and so, was that this politicized usage of history and in creating myths through communist ideology was just replaced with nationalist, or let's say ethno-nationalist behaviors that were pretty much the same. So, so for example, let's say um, the Yugoslav communist history writing was that the communists are the good guys, the nationalist militias are the bad guys, and now in the new these new systems, new countries, a new type of history, or I would say more mythology, is being published that is opposite to the communist one. So so my experience was that you have books at home, they tell you one thing, they inform you of one, in a certain way. Then you go to school and you are being informed in another way. And then you talk, let's say, to your parents or your grandparents, who I would say mainly my grandparents, because they grew up, with a very strong belief in the Yugoslav communist system. They tell you one thing, and people around you in your local area where I was growing up, they who are more, let's say, already under influence of, at that time, Serb nationalism, they tell you another thing about what happened in the past, what is important, what events, what dates should be considered as very important, should be highlighted, and so on. So that was my experience with history already in, I would say, late 90s, early 2000s. So I mean, as a child, of course, I can't understand everything. I still haven't developed enough complex thinking or analytical thinking, but I just feel like that there is some kind of gap. There are different realities, kind of interpretations of history existing at the same time. Um, so to say. And I just want to mention that one of the main reasons why, um, how to say, what happened so during and after the war, as in Bosnia and Herzegovina, so one of the main reasons why history became such a toxic thing to deal with, it was that the writing of history during the communist Yugoslavia was very much about idea that different, let's say, ethnic communities in Yugoslavia were able to come together and cooperate against fascism, or against, Nazi Germany, and they were able to create the Yugoslav country. After all, Yugoslavia actually, if you translate it, means the land of South Slavs. So Yugo comes from Yug, means south. Slavia is from Slavs, as a old historical term for Slavic, how to say, peoples and similar. So that was the official narrative. That was called like the history was serving the socialist patriotism, so to say. And the new, let's say, nationalist usage of history, or I would say more misusage, just as the communists did, was that they in the 90s were basically in different ways erasing or deleting these parts of history, because in the nationalist ideology, ethnic communities in Yugoslavia are not able to live together. They have to separate. And then you have to basically remove those parts of history that were showing that members of different ethnic communities were able to cooperate. They were able to create some kind of, let's say, Yugoslav identification, and they were able to unite. So that's the thing, to make a long story short. Now, there is a third part of this experience for me with history, was that I came to Sweden as a young teenager, and this was a very big change for me. I mean, I basically came from one extreme, so to say, to another. I came from one of the most dysfunctional, poorest, terrible countries in Europe to the complete opposite. One of the best countries to live in, best quality of life, democracy, individual freedoms, human rights, and so on. And here in Sweden, my experience was history was in line with what my parents were actually promoting. That history should be a matter of science, political science, social science. History has to be based on facts. It has to be based on critical methods. It has to be based on scientific research, scientific methods for understanding what actually happened in the past. History has to be separated from political ideologies, so history should not be submitted to a certain, let's say, party political ideology like socialism or liberalism or conservatism and so on. Not to speak about nationalism, because just to make another long story short, There is still today, as 200 years ago, there is this constant, how to say, friction between nationalism and history, because nationalism is very much about myths. It's very much about romantic stories, while history is supposed to be about science, it's supposed to be about rationality, and history is also about things that many people don't like to hear about. Because according to science, we as humans, we our brain is more interested in myths and romantic stories than in rationality and true, because the true is very complex, and as humans, we are historically, I would say, not really created for managing complex problem and challenges. We are, I would say our nature is very much local, in the sense like most of the time on Earth is spent like in very small tribes, like families and clans, and similar. So the point is that the truth can be very hard emotionally for many people to accept. One example of this in my experience in Bosnia and Herzegovina is that for many people it's still today very hard to accept that somebody who is a war criminal or was a war criminal, maybe died in a prison, actually did bad things, because in their opinions this guy was a hero, so to say, and they simply can't accept that this guy actually murdered people or put them in a concentration camp or similar. So the thing is, when I came here to Sweden so this was in 2003, I was a young teenager. um, I started reading history more in the sense um, about, let's say, economy and political ideas, how institutions have developed. Also, when I started high school, more in the middle of 2000s, um, I was also in touch with history that was partly more about Europe, but part also like more international, or let's say even global, about understanding the world. And for me, this was a sign of progress. For me, this was a sign. This is something good. This is something very positive. I'm actually learning history in a much better way compared to my old, let's say, classmates, my old childhood friends in Bosnia, who are still stuck in this kind of um, basically, national, or let's say nationalist mythology, where you are being told about something that happened, 600 years ago, Battle of Kosovo, and you are being told about that in a similar way that was done in Europe in general, 200 years ago. So, for example, if you were living now in France in 1850, you were reading about how French kings were so great, and we had so much success. And if you're living, let's say, somewhere maybe later in Germany or Italy or Sweden, you were kind of, being taught in a similar way that Swedish kings were the best. They were big warriors. The German kings were the big conquerors, big warriors. They never did anything wrong. They were so noble and good. And here in Sweden, suddenly I was able to understand history more to, based on scientific methods, on rational thinking, critical thinking, based on facts. So trying to understand history through different perspectives. So if you apply now economic history, social history, political history, and so on. Now, I'm personally, later on when I finished high school, I started my university studies, and at that time I wanted to study military history. And my specialization in history is actually, how to say, I'm educated in military history. So I took it at the Swedish National Defense College, which is, how to say, a kind of, you can say, not completely a military academy, but they also have civilian subjects, so to say, topics to teach. And one thing I learned by studying military history was that if you study history by looking on the world as a whole, so looking on the planet, not looking in the individual nations or parts of the world, but if you look on the planet in general, is that you can actually understand many many things that can feel very mind-blowing. You can understand how ideas are spreading. You can understand how humans are behaving, how our institutions are developing. You can you can understand, for example, that uh, when it comes to, let's say, to weapons and arms, that even people who can be very conservative in the sense that they really don't like change and they want to keep things as they are, they speak a lot about traditions and heritage and so on, even they are very adaptable to change if they experience that there is some kind of weapon that's simply more efficient, something better, that's a game changer on the battlefield, so to say, if I can express it like that. So one example is if you take, let's say, the samurai warriors in Japan, or if you take, let's say, tribes in Africa, or kingdoms in Africa that were fighting against the European nation, the colonizers, is that they actually start adapting contemporary, firearms and similar, because they realize it's simply more efficient. Even if you look on the, let's say, Native Americans, or let's say, Indians, so to say, the old term, when they were fighting against the American government, or the whites, so to say, even they started adopting modern firearms. So instead of just using instead of using just, let's say, knives or bows and arrows, and so to say. Um, and some of my reflections when it comes to global history is that, and this is also when it comes to, let's say, global military history, is that by understanding it, by analyzing it, studying it, it's possible to create a lot of understanding, a lot of wisdom that can be applied locally. So what I mean in practice is that it's possible to create knowledge and awareness about, why wars are happening, why are people or humans fighting against each other, what are the typical reasons, what are the main, or sorry, so what are the main um, factors for that, and thereby it's possible to create knowledge and awareness and wisdom that can be connected to ideas of global citizenship, meaning that we as humans have to behave in a certain way in order to do things that are considered to be positive and important for the planet in general. This can be also connected very much to discussions about climate change and ecology, because today humans are doing many things that on the local level can seem very not so important, or even very good or funny, but on the global level they create problems. So one example is, let's say, if you take CO2 emissions. So if you are now driving a fossil fuel car, and you are, let's say, a young male, young guy, teenager, it can be very fun. You go for a Saturday night with your buddies, and you're driving around, and you feel like you're having a lot of fun, you're having this sense of adventure, and it feels good. You're having company, your sense of community, you're doing fun, you're drinking something or going to a party, driving around. But the thing is, if you look on the global level, all of these emissions and unsustainable levels of consumption create problems. And emissions being made in one country, but they still go and affect other countries, they affect the planet in general, because it goes up to the sky, atmosphere, and so on. And it's a similar thing when it comes to wars. For example, if you look now what's happening, let's say, in Ukraine, it's actually not only about Ukraine, or not even only about Europe, but it's actually affecting the world in general, pretty much, for different reasons, because it's about um, how much money is being spent on weapons, on destruction, on hate, on propaganda, on horrible things, um, instead of money being spent on, let's say, climate transformation or education, or even, let's say, lowering taxation or other things that are important for the future. So the point is that through global history, we can become better in our relations, behaviors, and actions at local level. And I also want to add, when it comes to the country I was born in, so Bosnia and Herzegovina, that one of the problems there still today, after the war, is that I would say most people in Bosnia, they still don't have a agreement or consensus or general understanding about what actually happened during the war, or more like why the war happened. Why was there a war there from the start? And one of the reasons people cannot make an agreement is because, or understanding, is because they're very nationalist. In practice, it means that you don't support facts, scientific conclusions, research, statistics, or the true in general. You don't support that if you feel emotionally that that is going against your identification. And if your identification is that your, let's say, ethnic group or community, or your nation, doesn't matter if it's ethnic or civic, if you think that that's so important for you, that that is like something that is above everything else, then you will not be able to accept things that go against that. If you believe that your, let's say, your group, your people are noble and holy and friendly, they've never done anything wrong to history, it's gonna be very hard for you to accept evidence showing the opposite, facts showing the opposite. And I would say that through applying global history, it would be even easier, not easy, but easier for people generalized, like in Bosnia, or even, let's say, in Russia today, to actually understand what happened in the past. Because if you apply global history, then you can understand that what you did yourself, or somebody in your family did in a certain country during a war, has actually already been done in other places around the world. So then you can start understanding that, oh, wait, this is not unique for me or for us. This is actually something that has happened before. This is something that actually humans are still doing. And this can be prevented. This is not, it's not like there is some kind of natural law that wars have to happen and people just have to fight against each other. So these are some of my reflections about the importance of global history in order to have awareness, knowledge, wisdom about the world in general, but also to understand, certain actions and behaviors in order to be a global citizen, instead of believing in myths, in pure lies, in tribalistic, romantic stories that are giving you a sense of satisfaction, or what can be called, mental masturbation, but don't make you into a better person, because you will still end up in uh, hating other people, even killing them, because you are driven by myths, us versus them, and you are driven by narratives and even stories that are actually very terrible, inhuman, and dehumanizing and destructive, that basically lead to you doing things with other people, leading to destruction and poverty, misery, hate, and so on. So those are some of my reflection based on my own experience. So from a, let's say, so it's based on like communist period, post-communist period, very nationalist period, and then coming to Sweden as a more open, globalized society. Thank you very much for listening to my reflections, my thoughts. Please add some comments, feedback if you have something you want to say or write. And I hope in the future to be able to make more videos and also do more writing about this. Thanks.